So we know Puff and his legal team put together a massive bail package, and nonetheless, they were denied bail not one, not two, but three times. And he had filed a notice of appeal to the appellate court in order to challenge the denial with the Court of Appeals. And he has since voluntarily dismissed that appeal to the higher court. And, if he's trying to get out of custody, which clearly he was, why would he do that, right? Why would he voluntarily dismiss the appeal? And does that have some sort of impact on the criminal case and the trial coming up in May? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. I want to welcome you back if you've watched one of my videos before, but if you don't know me, my name is Jamahl Kersey and I'm a criminal defense attorney. I've been practicing law for over 15 years. And on this channel, we break down legal concepts so you are in the know. And before I get into it, I just want to take a moment to thank Shawty for the gift. Thank you so much. There's been a few of you guys who have left me gifts lately, and I really, really do sincerely appreciate it. All right, so the reason why Diddy voluntarily dismissed his appeal is because there was just no shot at winning. Well, why didn't he have any shot at winning? It's because the standard is just too high. And, the standard of review for the Court of Appeals in reviewing bail denials is basically an abuse of discretion. And what that means is that the appellate court would have to find that Judge Subramanian abused his discretion in denying bail. And so that would mean that they would just have to find that Judge Subramanian made a clear error of judgment in denying bail. And, going back to what Judge Subramanian listed as the reasoning for him denying bail, his denial is going to be pretty well founded. So we look at the nature of the crimes that Diddy has been charged with. Again, that's sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, and transportation for the purpose of prostitution. And we know that there's presumptive detention, which means, again, that when you are charged with sex trafficking, there's a presumption that you are going to be detained pending trial. Now, again, that can be overcome. It's a rebuttable presumption, but that is something that already is weighing against you when you're trying to request bail. The factor that was probably the most damaging to Puff was the danger to the community. So danger to the community, danger to potential witnesses, and danger to the alleged victims in this case. Judge Subramanian just felt that there was no possible way that he could keep these individuals safe if he were to let Puff out, even under the very restrictive conditions proposed. And so ultimately he found that Puff has a propensity for violence. I mean, that's something that the prosecution was arguing, and the tape involving Diddy assaulting Kersey was, exhibit A of that. And that's just really hard to overcome. It's hard to, as a defense attorney, say your client is not a violent person when all the prosecutor has to do is press play on that video and you see him brutally attacking this woman. You just really don't have anywhere to go when when the prosecution is saying that your client is violent. You can say, hey, this is an isolated incident. Ideally, if somebody does something like that, maybe they've done some anger management, maybe they've been doing therapy, maybe they've been doing something to show that they're not the person that they was or that they were back then, right? Because we're in 2024. This happened in 2016, 8 years ago, but it's my understanding nothing to that effect was presented. And so therefore they weren't able to overcome that argument that he's a dangerous person. The judge was also concerned with witness tampering. We heard that Diddy had just made an unreasonably large amount of communications to a person who had already been sworn into the grand jury proceedings. And while there was some sort of explanation for some of the communications, they weren't able to account for all of those communications, and it just seemed highly suspicious. And so again, even with the proposed conditions by the defense, the judge simply was not convinced that Diddy wouldn't get out of custody and start trying to communicate with potential witnesses and victims. And then lastly, flight risk is always going to be present when somebody is potentially facing the rest of their life in prison, which Diddy is. And so again, I mean, the bail package just simply not being enough, even though, $50 million is a massive number. That's just not something that you're seeing left and right in court. People, proposing a $50 million bond, but that wasn't enough, along with the 24/7 security, no access to phone or internet. The judge just, again, was not convinced that the conditions proposed or any conditions would be sufficient to protect the safety of the public. And so, I mean, you can disagree with this decision, right? And obviously Diddy and his lawyers disagreed, and that was why they had filed the notice of appeal. But there's just no way. There's no way that any circuit court would overturn Judge Subramanian's decision. And so, breaking bad news is just part of being a defense attorney, right? I mean, we'd like to get all of our cases dismissed, but sometimes, your counteroffer that you're making to the prosecutor to reduce a felony to a misdemeanor gets denied, or, you try and get the prosecutor to agree to allow your client to be released on bail, and that gets denied, or a judge denies your motion. And to have to explain those things to a client can be difficult, but obviously being upfront and honest and not giving your client any false hopes is the key in these situations. And you just have to really have solid communication skills to be able to break these pieces of information to your client. And so, this in particular would have been difficult for Puff, I think, to accept. And we saw in the comment sections a lot of times people saying, "Man, he didn't kill anybody. Why is he being detained?" And I imagine he would say the same thing. Like, I'm proposing $50 million, 24/7 security. How's that not enough, right? So I can imagine that conversation was pretty difficult to have between Puff and his lawyers on the issue. But ultimately, in terms of, not fighting this on appeal, that is just the wise thing to do. I mean, we have trial coming up in May, and that's going to be here quicker than you know it. I mean, there's a lot of dead days in December. We have Thanksgiving, but there's dead days in December. You got dead days in the new year, people going on vacation, all the like. And so you really, at this point, you have to have your lawyers preparing for trial. Instead of chasing hopeless possibilities as it relates to appealing bail, you need to have them focus on trial. And there's still a lot of preparation to do. I mean, there are terabytes of discovery that have been put out by the prosecution, and they haven't even put everything out yet. It's my understanding there was a motion hearing today at which the defense was asking for more discovery, right? And the judge had ordered the prosecution to provide the discovery by the end of the year. And you would imagine that there's probably more stuff that they have. They had already indicated that their investigation was ongoing and continuing. So they were still talking to witnesses, still probably reviewing, photographic and video evidence in order to review it and put it out in discovery for the defense to review. And so we know that there's a possibility that there could be a superseding indictment, right? So there could be more charges filed against Puff. There could be new victims named, and there could be new defendants named. I think that's probably less likely, but it is a possibility given all of the investigation that they've been doing. And so the lawyers really need to be strategizing for trial, right? They got a lot of work ahead of them. They have to prepare for jury selection, right? So there's a lot of, art and science that goes to picking the right jury for your case. And a lot of trial lawyers will tell you that a case can be won or lost in jury selection. And I know that to be true. You have to prepare for your opening statement, your cross-examination of all the government's witnesses. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of witnesses that the defense has to prepare to cross-examine. They have to prepare for the examination of their own witnesses and closing arguments. So when you see these trials on TV and you see these lawyers, making these statements, making these arguments, examining witnesses, there's just hours and hours and hours of preparation that goes into making that look like it does when you see it, And so it's just a lot of work. And again, that's where the defense attorney's focus should be at this point. But does the denial of bail, so the denial of bail and Diddy's withdrawal of his appeal, does that mean anything about the case itself? And that's a natural question, but the answer is no. So Judge Subramanian obviously denied bail, but he was not deciding whether Diddy is guilty or not, right? That's not the function of a bail hearing. So it's the jury alone that will make the decision as to whether Diddy is guilty as charged. And so just because he's been denied bail does not mean that he'll be found guilty of all the charges. I mean, the prosecution still has the burden of proving each and every one of the elements of each and every one of these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Last year I represented a young man who was charged with attempted murder, and he was facing the rest of his life in prison, and that was based on a premeditation allegation. And he was only 20, he was in his early 20s, right? And so to potentially face the rest of your life in prison, obviously that's a very serious situation. And this case was involving a shooting, so there were guns involved, and he was ultimately denied bail twice, right? So we tried to request bail twice. We were denied that due to the serious nature of the charges, and obviously with him facing the rest of his life in prison, flight risk was pretty high. And the judge also found that he would be a danger to the alleged victim if he were released. And so, that was another one of those things where we had to, break this news to my client and his family. They were pretty distraught about this. We had a lot of positive letters of support, believe it or not, for this young man, saying how hardworking he is, how talented he is. He's a good son. He's a good brother. He was an athlete. He was really good at sports. And, ultimately, we believed in our defense, but it still can be really difficult to continue to inspire and motivate your client and have them continue to believe in the defense and believe in you as a defense attorney when they've been denied bail, when they feel like they should have been able to get out, right? And so, this was a situation where he's facing life and it was really difficult, but fortunately, ultimately, we were able to get the attempted murder charge dismissed, so he was no longer facing life. We were eventually able to get him out of custody, and I definitely would have felt comfortable putting this case in front of a jury and arguing that he was acting in self-defense, but in this situation, we had received an offer that he simply could not refuse, and so we ended up settling the case. But it does go to show that just because you are denied bail, it doesn't mean that you are guilty of everything you're being charged with, and it certainly doesn't mean that you don't have a solid defense. Again, Puff's lawyers have stated numerous times that as it relates to these freak-offs, that every single person who participated in these freak-offs were there because they wanted to be there, and nobody was forced to be there. Nobody was tricked into doing something that they didn't want to do, and certainly nobody was, having sex against their will. That's been the defense's position from day one. That's what they plan on putting in front of the jury, and hoping that ultimately the jury sides with them and finds Puff not guilty of the charges that he's being accused of. So it's definitely a major blow to have to defend your case from behind bars versus being out of custody, but that's what it is, and he's just got to make peace with that and focus on trial. Well, that's it for this video. So if you got something out of it, please show me some love and hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.